Okay, so let's continue our discussion here of managing people. And the next thing I want to talk about is resource breakdown structures. This is an easy way for you to be able to identify who's working in what capacity. So you take your project and you break it down into categories of work. There's the management level, the mechanical group, the electrical group, so on and so forth. And within each group, you can identify the individuals. I have one project manager, two mechanical engineers, three drafters. You can even take that a step further to identify how much each person costs per hour, how much you're charging the client per hour for each person. I charge, for example, $120 an hour for my project coordinator. Let's say arbitrary number here. So resource breakdown structures really give you a sense of who's involved in your project, at what capacity, who is available, who's there. Now, stemming on from that, we know who's working on the project, who are the stakeholders involved as well, because this will be important here. We can start to develop what's known as RACI charts. RACI stands for responsible, accountable, consulted, informed. And all it is a chart where you list all the activities that you're going to be doing on your project, and you list at the top all the people involved in the project. And for each activity, you're going to assign it an R, A, C, or I, RACI, for certain people. So, for example, we have activity A. Who is responsible for getting activity A done? Oh, it could be Mike. It could be even this group of people. So I'll put an R under their name on that row of the activity. Who's accountable for making sure that this activity gets done? Now remember, the person who's responsible for doing the activity doesn't necessarily need to be the person accountable for making sure it gets done. It could be their supervisor. Who's accountable to report back to say, yes, this activity is confirmed complete? Who's going to be consulted on this activity? So who do we need to get input from to be able to perform this activity? So for example, if I'm in the stage where I'd like to migrate content into the homepage of this website, I need to consult the client to understand what the content is that they'd like to move in. Who's going to be consulted on this activity? Who's going to simply be informed? So who do I need to keep up to date? Mainly someone like senior management. I need to keep them up to date on the progress of this particular activity. This is what's known as a RACI chart, and extremely, extremely useful. We're used on a lot of projects and really helps you make clear to everyone what everyone's role is on the project. So there is no confusion later on. Okay. So when we get talking about the team specifically, we get into a topic called resource loading. And as you can see by the image here, it's how much load you are putting on the individual. Monitoring load level is absolutely crucial as part of your role as project manager. You can use different tools here. You can even use a simple histogram chart just to show you the different capacities of each person. You need to monitor the load of each person because as you overload people, it can eventually lead to burnout. If Mike is constantly working 15 hours a day for a month, he's going to burn out. What happens when people burn out for long periods of time? They're likely to start looking for another job. Burnout leads to a lot of negative consequences. Now, that's not to say that burnout will never happen. Of course it'll happen, and we all expect it to happen to us on our jobs. We're going to burn out at one point in time or another. But, we burn out for a little time, and then the project is done, or we move on to the next phase, or we take a vacation and on to the next one, right? But when burnout is prolonged, when we spend too much time constantly burn out, we spent the entire year burnt out working in this job, working on this project, we're eventually going to look for another job because it's affecting our mental health. It's affecting our physical health, right? So you really need to be very careful on how much load you're putting on your resources, on your team. A tool that you can use here is called resource leveling, and it helps you reduce loads a little bit. So you can examine the float that you have on an activity. Remember when we talked about float in scheduling? You can say, for example, activity A has a float of 5 days. Okay, so if it has a float of 5 days and Mike has been working 15 hours a week for the past month, let's get him to slow down a little bit, okay? And we can absorb some of that float on activity A. We can say, okay, no problem. We'll prolong activity A for 2 or 3 more days to give Mike a bit of a break, to bring his days back to normal working hours. And we'll absorb that float. That's called resource leveling, using up the float to help reduce load. Okay, a lot of information to digest here, so we'll stop it here and we'll see you on the next one.